can you turn off those lights? See the switch? Are we up and running? I have a verse that I thought we'd read today. Here's the background. Laura, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay. I own a restaurant, and restaurants have been, by and large, adversely affected by the coronavirus pandemic. So, it's pretty straightforward. If your restaurant is adversely affected, there's really just one metric you look at. If you want to determine how your restaurant's doing, there's just really one metric. And if you're going to say we've been adversely affected, there's just one thing you got to look at. What do you look at? That's it. It's pretty straightforward. If you say my restaurant's been adversely affected, if you say my manufacturing plant's been adversely affected, there could be any number of things that could be going, maybe increased protocols or distancing, or you can't output the same amount, or sales, or your sales. So there's a whole bunch of factors that could be at play, but with a little cafe like I have, it's pretty straightforward. It's just sales. But then today is like, I don't say it's going to be like our biggest sales day of the ever, which seems like it should be a good thing, but we're not set up for it. So it's a crisis, because we're not set up for all of a sudden doing twice the business we would normally do on a given Sunday evening. Go crack that door for me. Thank you. So that's what I was dealing with just before I showed up here. That's what I was dealing with just before I showed up here. And so it got me thinking. It's very rare that the weather is exactly the way you like it. It's either too cold or it's too hot. It's too dry or it's too humid. I go to India, we go in the Himalayas, and it's inevitably either too cold. I feel like I have to start class all over again. You guys have created too much of a disturbance. My mind is, I'm trying to think, and it's tough. Forgive me, and I go to the Himalayas fairly frequently, a couple times a year, and it's never right. It's always a little too cold and rainy, or a little too hot and sunny. even in Southern California, where we have some of the best weather on the planet, you just get more and more sensitized. So whereas most people think we have the best weather on the planet, we become persnickety, and we become really, picky and choosy. That's just a little bit too humid, or it's a little bit too hot, or the wind's blowing a little too much or not quite enough, or I got to wear a shirt when I don't want to wear a shirt, or it's just, if you're only vacillating 10 degrees, then you want to only vacillate 5. It's like that. If you live, like Hawaii, people think Hawaii's paradise. It's too humid for me. You start doing that equatorial climate, and it's always too humid for my taste. And then there's always all those huge bugs that you get when you're by the equator. All the bugs are 5 times their normal size, and that becomes a problem. So, yeah, I had the coronavirus pandemic has made sales much lower at our restaurant, which is a problem. And all of a sudden sales are much better, and somehow that's also a problem. And we had too few customers, and now we have too many customers and too few staff. I'm 48 now, and I think it's always like that. I think it's always like that. Have you noticed the same thing in your life? Your clothes are too loose, or they're too tight, or you know what I mean? You didn't work out hard enough, or you worked out a little too hard. People are being callous towards you, or they're being too, what's the kind of attached or needy, or, There's a song called Cats in the Cradle. It's like an old, it must be from the 60s. And the storyline is that the son wants to play with his dad, but the dad's always too busy doing stuff. And the dad wants to play with the son, but then the son's become like his father, and now he's a busy businessman, and he's too busy. So now the father's old and has nothing else going on and wants to spend time with his son. The son's grown up in a man, and he's in the same hustle and bustle mode that his father was in, and they never quite meet up. On one hand, it's amazing how adaptive we are as human beings. The world has changed so dramatically from what it was like 6 months ago. I don't really feel that different. My life doesn't really feel that different. I might be a little unusual in that my life, I don't get out much, and so it doesn't really make much of a difference. But I've adapted quite well to the new circumstance. It seems like everybody else is too. On one hand, it's never quite right, and on the other hand, we have this incredible ability to adapt to changing circumstances and make the best out of whatever life throws at us. And human beings have this resilience. It's funny, on one hand we can deal with that, whatever life throws at us. On the other hand, we're never quite satisfied with what life throws at us. So I was reflecting on that just a few minutes ago. And I thought of a verse. A lot of times people think of songs or movies as, I don't know, accoutrements to their life. They think of a validating or confirming lyric or movie scene. I also do that. But then I also think of verses. One of the benefits of reading our sacred literature is that the verses and the stories in our sacred literature become like that for you. They become places that your mind naturally goes to. Anyway, the verse it's a famous verse. Matra sparshas tu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkha da agama apaino anitya tangs titichasva bharata. I got somebody texting me that we're out of French fries. Got to turn my phone over. Matra sparshas tu kaunteya. But only sense perception. Sparsha means touch, but it's used as a single word which indicates all the senses. Taste, sight, touch, smell, and sound. Matra means only. Only sense perception. Agama apaina, coming and going. Anitya, temporarily. Shita ushna, sukha dukkha daha, giving pleasure and pain, happiness and distress, heat and cold. It's just temporary, impermanent, coming and going sense perception. That's what's giving you your happiness and distress, and your heat and cold, and your pleasure and pain. The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer. They arise from sense perception, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. That's the last line. Tangs tatikshasva. Tolerate that. I don't believe that there's any solution to living in this world that doesn't necessitate us becoming a little bit thick-skinned. If you want to be hypersensitized and you want to be easily flustered, and you want to be snowflakey, and you want to get spun out because of the lack of safe spaces and the patriarchy and this and that, you're setting yourself up for being perennially unhappy. There's no version of this world that doesn't require, at the outset, a base level of callousness. We have to become somewhat calloused and unresponsive and thick-skinned and transcendent towards the inevitable ups and downs of this crazy roller coaster ride called the material world. Good things are going to happen, and bad things are going to happen, and everything in between, rapid fire succession. You know, a lot of times astrologers will say, oh, this is a retrograde period, and this and that are going to happen. It's like every other week they're saying that. And pretty much it's always like that. There was one mentalist, he took objects that were dear to people and held them in his hand and then wrote a detailed horoscope for that person, but based on this sacred object. And he did it with people from 10 different countries, 30, 40 people. And then he interviewed each one of them and he asked them how accurate he was. And he was getting like 90, I think his lowest score was 88%, up to 95, 96%. People were crying like, you know me, no one's ever been this accurate. You like know me more than anybody else. People were crying, freaking out. And then there was the big reveal. He'd written the exact same horoscope for all 40 people from 10 different countries before ever meeting any of them. He just handed them a generic boilerplate reading. You should write a book about your experiences. And you feel more deeply than most people do. Blah, 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 blah. You're an old soul. Just all these platitudes. And people just ate it up. Same guy played 10 chess grandmasters simultaneously. But he didn't. He was the first move in half the games, and he was the second move in the other half the games. And so he just copied the first move of the 5 grandmasters he was playing as his first move against the other 5 grandmasters. And just copied their moves back and forth. You follow? Right? And then the guys he did those first moves against, he saw what they did in response, and he went back over there and did that move in response. And they were like, this is one of the best chess players in the world. No one can play 10 games like this. I mean, some chess players can actually play 10 games like that, but they were freaking out. But he didn't know how to play chess. He just copied. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to fall in love. You're going to suffer loss. You're going to feel betrayal. You're going to learn some lessons. If you're smart, you're going to learn those lessons from your elders, not have to go through it yourself. You're going to get old and ugly and frail. And you're going to get sick. Other people are going to get sick. People are going to die. Then you're going to die. At the end of your life, you are not going to regret that you spent too much time being spiritual. At the end of your life, you're going to regret your materialism. Nobody finishes life and thinks, I had too much integrity in this lifetime. Too much integrity. Nobody thinks like that. They always lament they didn't have more integrity. Birth, death, old age, and disease. Society, friendship, and love. Winters and summers. Heat and cold. Pleasure and pain. Happiness and distress. Lust, anger, greed. It's all just different. You know, it's like Mexican food. Not really Mexican food. Tex-Mex. I'm not so into Mexican food. I'm into Tex-Mex. Sometimes my friends from Mexico make Mexican food, and I'm like, this is so bland. Your beans have no flavor to them because they don't put cumin and paprika and all the spices I'm accustomed to having in my flavorful preps, and not a ton of vegan cheese, you know? And so, you know, like, what is Tex-Mex? It's just rice and beans and tortillas, salsa, guacamole with different delivery systems, you know? You fry it up and it's chilaquiles. You know, you stack it. You stack it on top of something that's nachos. You stack it on top of something big. That's tostadas. You wrap it up. That's a burrito. You wrap up a small version of it called taco. It's a hard shell or a soft shell. It's just the same basic stuff, right? It's the same 5 or 6 ingredients. Italian food's, I mean, at least my version of Italian food, not actual Italian food. Again, actual Italian food's a bunch of seafood and stuff like that. Not my cup of tea, but. You know, it's tomato sauce, cheese, and pasta. Different sizes of pasta and cooked in different ways, but it's the same basic thing. Right? It's just the same core ingredients with different delivery systems. The material world's like that. We're incredibly adaptive. The world's changed so much. People survive. I mean, people survived the Great Depression. People survived World War I and World War II. People survived the gas chambers. People survived the Spanish flu of 1918. I don't think anybody understands the Spanish flu of 1918, what to speak of the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague wiped out 1/3 of the world's population. It's okay, let him take darshan and go. The bubonic plague wiped out about 1/3 of the world's population. Maybe it was Europe's population, but it might have actually been the whole world. I can't remember. It was a huge number. The Spanish flu, which was the first coronavirus, the 1918 flu pandemic, the first coronavirus, also caused by us eating animals, living in close proximity to animals, and the zoonotic diseases jumped and mutated and were able to take hold in human beings. That Spanish flu infected, wait for it, 500 million people. 1/3 of the world's population got the Spanish flu in 1918, in my grandmother's lifetime. And about 50 million of those people died. 3% of the world's population. So big. We've all had that Spanish flu. It's endemic to human society now. It's unbelievable how we can just adapt. You take everybody's water away, and we'll be walking 10 miles to get water and bring it back to our village. Start moving near rivers like people have done since the dawn of time because we can't. As the whole areas of India that have no water, they truck the water in. Vrindavan's water was totally undrinkable. Everybody has to drink bottled water in Vrindavan. Or RO water, reverse osmosis water, because the actual water there is so brackish and salty, it's undrinkable. You take bath in Vrindavan, you feel like you have chalk all over your body. Your soap won't suds up. People just deal with it. They survive. They truck in their water, you know? People start living off of rainwater. It's too expensive to make seawater potable. The guy who does the 5-hour energy drinks, who's a South Indian Brahmin from India, he's investing money in figuring out how to make affordable desalination plants, portable ones that you can just put anywhere in the ocean and create potable drinking water. It's just way too expensive now. They have them for boats and stuff like that, but it's way too expensive for mass use. Until it's not. As soon as we're all dying of thirst, all of a sudden, it'll be an affordable technology. People be, just like you work to pay your rent, and rent went from, a quarter of what you were making to a third. Now it's like half to 2/3 of what you're making gets paid for your rent. You'll pay half your money for water. Just become normal. Figure out a way to survive. There's a movie series called Mad Max. There was a Road Warrior, and then there's Australian movies, Mad Max, and then they really blew it. They did Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. It was like the introduction of the Ewoks into the Star Wars franchise. It was the beginning of the end. But in the beginning was Mad Max and the Road Warrior. They were two really rough and tumble movies, like the original Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. They were huge parts of my childhood. But anyway, in one of them, people were fighting over water. That was the big thing in those movies. That was the premise. People were fighting over water. Which someday people will fight over water, for sure. We're messing with Mother Nature so bad. At some point, we're going to be fighting over water. Plus, we live in a desert. This is like the desert. Southern California is a desert. We artificially, if you go to the water department in Laguna, outside they have all the indigenous plants. It's chaparral. It's desert. It's a fancy word for the desert with some bushes. And that's, they grow those plants. But we truck in water from the Colorado River. And we live the life of Riley and just waste so much water. You live in India, sometimes you have a well in your village, and you want to get water, you go to the well and you pull the water out of your well. And you get good at it. You learn how to pull the water up in 2 pulls. So you drop your bucket down, and then you reach down deep in the well with one hand, and you rip the bucket up. And now you usually have a small bucket because you don't want a big bucket because you can't get the water out that fast. You rip it up with one hand, and then you grab it with the other hand and pull it out. And you can get the water out of the well with just two pulls. Does that make sense? You've also got the tube wells with the handles, the seesaw handles. Those are great, but if you really go rural, there's wells, and you're pulling water out of the well with a bucket. And I learned how to do everything with a single bucket of water. I learned how to wash my underwear, brush my teeth, take a full bath, scrub my feet, and do everything. Put on my T-lock with the amount of water contained in one bucket. Because I didn't have to go back and get another one. So I figured it out. And you get good at it. I think we should applaud people's amazing ability to adapt and survive and adjust. At the same time, we need to get a little more thick-skinned. Because even if nothing goes wrong, you're going to get old, your eyesight's going to go, your hand-eye coordination's going to go, your mind is going to go, your memory's going to go, your sure-footedness is going to go, and you're going to become a decrepit old person and you're going to die. That's what's on the menu. Maybe go out on your shield in some kind of blaze of glory. Before that, which I don't think anybody's really excited about that. I think we'd all prefer to, hobble out of here. The world's like a cruel place. Nature is a cruel mistress. You see animals eating each other in the wild. It's gnarly. And we might be an apex predator. We are, because we're so damn smart. But nature chews us up nonetheless with old age, disease, and death. 6 million Jews got wiped out in 5 years. 6 million other people got wiped out in 5 years. 2 million people died from Pol Pot in the 70s. There's a couple 100,000 slaves still in Mauritania, on the northwest coast of Africa. They still have slavery. They made it illegal in 2007, 2012, 2007. But they still have them. There's 2 million sex slaves on the planet. $16 million people are dying of heart attacks. 9 million people are dying of cancer. 5 million people are dying of smoking. $3.1 million people are dying of starvation. Millions of children are stunted every year. It means they'll grow up to be 4 to 5 inches shorter than they should be because they didn't get proper nutrition as a child. The world's a dangerous, violent, cruel place. While we're making the best out of this bad bargain, while we're learning to be kind to our fellow man, while we're learning to uplift each other and cultivate fine qualities, we shouldn't forget that we're all under the thumb of Mother Nature. We need to develop some callousness and not get so easily shook up. We need to applaud and hold on to and cultivate our resilience and our ability to adapt as human beings. It's what makes us an apex predator, is our ability to adapt to changing circumstances, our responsiveness, our ability to pivot. We need to cultivate that, and we need to cultivate some callousness, just some thick-skinnedness, some stoicism, essentially. And Krishna makes a powerful argument here. What generally bends you out of shape is the temporary ups and downs and comings and goings of this world, which automatically give you heat and cold, pleasure and pain, happiness and distress. And you need to rise above that and become a little callous towards it. You know, like when you play mridanga, your hands get calloused. And you can beat on the drum and not cut your hand open. When you lift weights, your hands get calloused. And you can hold on to a bar and not rip your hands apart. Guitar players' fingertips get calloused so they can play. Muay Thai fighters, their bones suffer little micro fissures and they become hardened so they can kick trees even without injury because they toughen up their shins. We need to develop that kind of a thick skin towards the material world. We can still take precautions and be safe and do the right thing and survive as best we can. But Prabhupada used to always joke. They would talk about the death rate in India versus the death rate in the US, and Prabhupada says the death rate's the same everywhere. It's 100%. Everybody dies. That is our existential reality. We're in these bodies for a very short window of time. And it all gets taken away. We might be a pretty corpse, we might be an ugly corpse, like a young corpse or an old corpse, but that bell's ringing for all of us. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. At various points in history, people understood this, and so you have like the memento mori movement in art, where in medieval art, when they would paint things, they'd paint beautiful scenes. They'd put a skull in the they'd paint a bowl of fruit. There'd be a skull in the corner. Remember death, memento mori. Remember death. It was a Christian idea that, hey, there's something bigger going on here. This isn't all there is. Don't be a materialist. There's something bigger going on. Remind yourself of that. Actually put a token or a memento of death into your art celebrating life so you don't get too swept away by it. The next verse says, Yam hi no the vyatayant yete purusham purushashava samaduka sukha dhiram somrita vyaya kalpate. For the person who is not disturbed and is the same in happiness and distress, heat and cold, pleasure and pain, that person becomes eligible for liberation. So Stoicism is a prerequisite to really getting serious about your spiritual life. if you're a prima donna, if you're thin-skinned, if you're Epicurean, if you're a connoisseur of fine pleasures in life, if that's your thing, that you're an enjoyer, then you don't get transcendence. This Stoicism is a precursor to and a prerequisite for any kind of serious spiritual life. Otherwise, you're just a materialist masquerading as a spiritualist. I was in Vrindavan 30 years ago, 1991. I was traveling with some German devotees. We were walking through the 12 forests of Vrindavan by foot. It took about a month. We were barefoot. It was quite austere. And it's getting a little cold. We're taking bath out of buckets, doing our own laundry, walking 20 kilometers a day, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's cold. It gets cold. You're barefoot. Your feet are all cut up. You got to get up every day and walk. You're in a foreign country. They got different bugs there. Let them come in for darshan and send them out. They got different bugs there. Everybody's getting sick. And I remember there was a German sannyasi who was traveling with us, and he had a bunch of his German followers with him. And he said, I know you want your brown bread, your German fresh-baked brown bread. If you live in our temples in Germany, if you're in our temples in Germany, every day for breakfast they make this really nice brown, like pumpernickel type bread with fresh whipped butter. It's like what German people eat for breakfast, at least what our people eat. And so he was saying, I know you're eating chapatis now and you're used to your brown bread, but very soon, in 1 month, we'll have again our brown bread. Just be here and do this and don't worry about it so much. I remember I remember thinking to myself, I'm not hung up on brown bread and pumpernickel bread, fresh made bread. I'm not from Germany, so that's not my thing. But all of us have our creature comforts. The things we simply can't do without. Whether they're vices or not, whether they're pious or impious creature comforts, everybody's got their thing that they can't do without. What's in their comfort zone. 2:14 and 15, chapter 2, text 14 and 15. You're going to have to give those up sooner or later. The life of a spiritualist is ultimately a life of renunciation. We don't just wait around to get the rug pulled out from under us. We let go. We hear Krishna's flute playing, and we move forward. Krishna plays his flute. It's an interesting idea that our version of divinity is attractive. He plays a seductive flute song, and it steals our minds and hearts, and like a Pied Piper entrances us, and we move forward and we follow. Most of the other deities in the Indian pantheon, they hold various weapons. Even if you look at Thor's got his hammer and Zeus has his thunderbolt. Indra has his Vajra. Everyone has their weapon that they hold. Ram has a bow. What's Krishna's weapon? What's his power symbol? It's a flute that he plays. And when he plays his flute, everyone comes running, attracted by that beautiful sound. We have to become callous towards this world as a prerequisite to really making a serious exploration of spirituality. That's important on one side. On the other side, we have to really try to engage with Krishna. We have to really try to go deep in our spiritual practice, so we have something we're running towards that will allow us to let go of the things we need to let go of when it comes time to do so. Eventually you have to let go of your own body. We got our creature comforts. Forget that. Eventually you're going to have to let go of your own body. What could be more painful than that? Like, we don't want to let go of our car or our clothes or our house or, you know what I mean? Our favorite foods. Eventually, you have to let go of your own body. You can't even eat. A famous rabbi who's also a psychologist, who I appreciate very much, he tells a story, it's like a Jewish folklore story, about two Jews who came to this country at the turn of the century. One of them opened laundromats and became incredibly wealthy, and the other one just owned a local convenience store. And they were meeting, and the one rich Jew had stomach ailments, and so he couldn't eat properly. So he had to survive on milk and biscuits. And he was telling the other Jewish person, he said, you know, you're lamenting that you never made any money, the poor one. But I would give all of my wealth to be able to just sit down and eat some rye bread and radishes like I did as a child. And the point the rabbi was making is that we're out of time, so I'm just going to go real fast. When you look at somebody's life and you envy them and you wish you had what they had, you don't get to pick and choose which parts of their life you wish you had. They have a whole life. So he wanted the money, but there were the stomach ailments and the anxiety that came with that money. And the other person had to pay for that. You follow? And the other person, the rich person with the stomach ailments, he was thinking, I'll give up all my money just to get rid of these stomach ailments. I'll take the poverty just to have my health back. That'd be worth it to me. One of the world champion wrestler has one leg. Jumps out on the mat on one leg. Wrestles with one leg. Can you imagine? The people he wrestles against complain, oh, he's only got one leg, so he's like a lot bigger than we are and a lot stronger, and you know, it's hard to get a hold of him. It's like, all right, maybe he's making it work for him, but the guy's on one leg. I mean, come on. You know, or there's a little person, world champion power lifter. He squats 700 pounds. He's like 4'8". A little tiny guy, the size of Covey. Smaller. Oh, well, he's just got a small range of motion. his legs are small, so he doesn't have to go that up and down that far to squat. People are always complaining. But, okay, so you understand my point? So then that means, the fact that he's lifting 5 times his body weight isn't as significant? When you look at people's lives, it's all the same thing. You're born in this world, you grow up a little, you try to make some babies, you get old, you fall apart, and you die. It's like that arc, like that changing bodies exhibit. You're growing up, and then you're growing down. Same thing for everybody. We need to have a very realistic, very callous, very tough understanding of the basic carnage of this world, and that everybody's ultimately going through the same thing. And not get caught up on the details. Oh, they got a nice cage. My cage isn't so nice. They got gilded bars on their cage. I don't have gilded bars on my cage. They got wet stool. I've got dry stool. Wet stool is much nicer. We got to become a little callous and see through the charade. On the other hand, we have to dive deeply into our spiritual practice so we can feel Krishna's presence, hear his flute, and become bewitched so we can walk away from this material world in a way nobody's able to do. The Stoicism is the same, but our tradition has this beautiful sweetness that we get, that is a stimuli. That's a stimulus for giving up this world. We need to work on both things. That's why we have 4 regular principles and we chant 16 rounds. There's a positive act to commune with and touch something bigger than yourself, and then there's letting go of the things that normally bind you to this world and making you incapable of really thinking in a deep way. So anyway, here I am, I'm 48. I'm just dealing with the same stuff I've been dealing with since I was a child. I had a big wheel growing up, but the other kids had this new thing called a green machine, which was a better plastic tricycle type deal when I was 5. And now I'm 48, and my restaurant's either not doing enough or it's doing too much. And it's just up and down. It never ends. There's always something to get strung out about and enmeshed in and freaked out about. Being a devotee means you make that person you're freaked out about and you're in anxiety about, you make that person Krishna. Prabhupada one time said, the devotee who is in the most anxiety to please Krishna is the best devotee. We got to figure out a way to get absorbed in Krishna, hung up on Krishna, fall in love with Krishna. Those are my thoughts today. We got a couple minutes left before we wrap it up. Anyone want to chime in?
springboard on last night's class, looking at what we need to give up. And
are you hearing this, Laura? Give me the thumbs up. Okay, louder.
And it's such a good point that you made about things being too little or too much, and me realizing how I live in such a life of pettiness. And, oh, it's just not quite right. And, it really takes me from focusing on how I want to engage with Krishna. It's So
We're such petty people with our tawdry baubles and concerns, isn't it? And when we compare ourselves to what people have had to deal with historically, we've got it so good. We're freaked out about, the coronavirus now and the healthcare system. And, there's not enough ventilators. They didn't have any ventilators before. They didn't have any quarantine procedures. They didn't even know what the bubonic plague. They didn't even know how disease spread. In 1918, people weren't dying of the coronavirus. They were dying of the super infection you got because of poor healthcare system. We got to remember what makes us our adaptability, our responsiveness. And ultimately, for a devotee, we want to become responsive to Krishna. The material world forces you to be responsive or perish. But ultimately, for a devotee, we want to be responsive to Krishna. We want to learn to hear Him, feel Him. And we want to be inspired to dance to the beat of His drum. To move to the sound of His flute. We want to become highly sensitized towards that. That idea that I'm real sensitive and I'm real I'm very fragile. We should have that towards Krishna. We should be in love with Krishna enough that we're willing to give up this world for Him. We should cultivate that sensitivity towards the clarion call of Krishna. And so it's not even that you give up that propensity to be a little bit sensitive. What you give up is being sensitive to material things. Are we done? The last point, the analogy about the weather puts things into perspective. One thing that's come clear for me is that detaching from what's going on around me allows me to have a clearer vision towards Krishna. Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much for that. That's great. We'll close on that. Thank you guys so very much. Hare Krishna.